Pay close attention. What you're about to see is Bible prophecy being fulfilled.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you news as it relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about diseases and pharmaceuticals in our water supplies, which we've talked about in times past. I don't think many people think about and take into consideration what is actually not being filtered out of their city water. Protests are spreading as a result of an officer-involved death in Minneapolis there, Minnesota, and we're going to discuss a little bit of the topic between India and China. Two nations with over 1 billion people in each country are kind of at odds regarding their borders and who thinks what is right and what, whose is whose. But one of the things that people are concerned with is that both of these countries are nuclear armed. Right. Yeah. But first, we're going to start out with just how clean is your water? Well, most municipalities sanitize and recycle their city's water, but just how thorough is that cleaning? We'll take a look at this video interview with author Seth Siegel. He wrote a book called Troubled Waters, and this video is courtesy of Full Measure. We're going to take a look at a little bit more on this subject.
Scientists have discovered a hard reality when it comes to our everyday drinking water. It's now loaded with a frightening array of contaminants, from pesticides to prescription medicine, that are not filtered out and can pose all kinds of health risks. We spoke to Seth Siegel, author of Troubled Water, about how this could have happened and the dangers it poses. When we're talking about what's in the water, what are some of the things that's in our water that might surprise people?
Well, we know for sure and widely there are chemicals like PFOA, the active ingredient in Teflon. We know for sure there's something called PFOS, which is an active ingredient in the Scotch Guard that you spray on your textiles.
Cancer-causing chemicals?
Yes, definitely cancer-causing and endocrine disrupting, which means the fancy term for the fact that it affects your hormonal system. So pesticides and herbicides, they're created to interfere with the reproductive life of a weed or of an insect. Well, that then gets washed into the water supply. We humans start to drink it, and even though it's very small doses of it, it's affecting us as well.
What are some of the pharmaceuticals, the medication that we find in our water, and isn't that cleaned out when there's normal purification process that goes on in municipalities?
You would hope so. You would think so. I assumed so when I started doing the research for my book. We have examples of where, mostly through fish research, we discover that products that we humans use on a daily basis are now in the fish. 50% of the fish they studied in the Great Lakes had psychiatric drugs in their brains and in their organs. So Prozac, Alexa, and drugs like that, and generics. The only way it comes into the water supply is humans take those pills, they pee it out after they've taken it a few hours later. It gets flushed through the wastewater treatment system into a waterway, all perfectly legal, exactly compliant with the law. And then it gets uptaken in fish, it gets uptaken in our drinking water, it gets uptaken in the water we use for our irrigation.
Was there a study that showed that hormones in the water is leading to what we would call transgender fish?
Well, I don't want to call it transgender fish, but I will call it intersexual fish. One recent study studied 19 rivers, and they found that there was a very high level of male fish that were now growing eggs from the estrogen. The only reason for that would be from the estrogen that is getting into the water. Now, some of that comes from birth control pills, some of that comes from animal feed, some of that comes from other natural sources. Now, whether it has an effect on human gender selection, that's a bridge too far. But there are people, not me, but there are people who have a suspicion that that may be the cause.
We have federal agencies that we have paid billions of dollars to for this very purpose. I mean, there are a few things more important probably than protecting the safety of our water supply. So how has this been allowed to happen?
Frankly, Cheryl, this is precisely why I wrote this book. It is not to write a book. It is to hopefully to launch a movement where people will say, I demand better oversight, and I demand better drinking water for myself and for my children.
Well, as Mr. Siegel said, not too many people probably are aware of all of that still being in their drinking water, and you would think that they would hope that this would be cleaned out, but bottom line is it's not. Still the pharmaceuticals, a lot of chemicals going in there, and people are consuming it on a daily basis.
That's right.
Well, in Florida, researchers are worried about the accidental discharge of untreated wastewater containing COVID-19 and are taking water samples to determine just how many people are sick in the area. Now, one doctor said that our wastewater is chock full of virus, and Miami-Dade began testing the water to determine the concentration of the virus in the sewage to determine how many people might be sick. Now, experts are concerned about untreated sewer water from broken sewer lines or contamination from flooding during hurricane season. And what takes place there is it all mixes together. It doesn't stay in the pipes or comes up out of the sewer,
Right.
and then gets back into, as we mentioned, the area drinking water or so forth. It filters back down in there, gets into lakes and so forth.
That's right. That's right. Well, between 2015 and 2017, the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, dealt with accidental releases of raw or partially treated sewage. Beaches were also closed around the area because of high levels of fecal bacteria. COVID-19 now has no problem with the salty environment of the ocean, and along with St. Petersburg, Houston is also testing its water in the same manner. But for now, as long as people infected with COVID-19 use toilets in the city, well, the virus will continue to flow into the wastewater treatment plants and potentially the oceans.
Well, in the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, an investigation is underway as protests erupt in response to the death of George Floyd while in custody of the police. Now, the U.S. attorney on the case said that no decision has been made regarding the case, but that they are conducting a robust and meticulous investigation surrounding the events and the police officers on that evening. Now, the county attorney echoed those statements, saying this will be investigated expeditiously and thoroughly, saying we have to do this right.
Now, this was said after protests over the death of Floyd turned violent. Minneapolis protesters set buildings ablaze that spread to over a dozen throughout the city. One person was found shot dead. Stores were looted, and many people had their businesses destroyed. In Los Angeles, protesters locked arms across the highway, halting traffic in downtown area. People are outraged over the viral video and images of Floyd on the ground in handcuffs while a police officer kneels on the back of his neck. And in the video, you can actually hear Floyd pleading with the officer, saying, "I can't breathe."
Well, by the time medics arrived, Floyd was found to be unresponsive. Authorities are said to be involved. The authorities that are said to be involved in an immediate investigation in an effort to calm a city of angry protests who are demanding justice. Now, even though officers in the area tried to disperse protesters with tear gas and rubber bullets, they soon lost control of the crowds. As the chaos rages on, the mayor is asking for help from the National Guard. Now, federal and local law enforcement spoke regarding the investigation, saying that they are conducting a robust and meticulous investigation surrounding the events of May 25th, 2020, and the police officers' actions on that evening.
President Trump stated that the sight of the video was very shocking and is asking the Attorney General to take a look at what's going on, but he didn't comment on what he thought should be done regarding the officer. Residents in the community are frustrated with the devastation brought about by the protesters as the lives and the businesses of many people were destroyed as a result of these ongoing protests. The Minneapolis police chief said, "I'm absolutely sorry for the pain, the devastation, and the trauma that Mr. Floyd's death has left on his family, his loved ones, our community in Minneapolis, and," he said, "across the world."
Well, video shows that the police officer, Derek Chauvin, who was leaning on Floyd's neck, along with 3 other officers, have been fired from the police department. Now, the mayor is calling for Chauvin's arrest. Chauvin has had 18 previous complaints filed against him in the past and has been disciplined twice. Now, currently, the National Guard has been activated, and Floyd's family, along with city officials, are begging for peace on the streets.
Well, we're going to take a look at some of the other ongoing chaos, as it were, or conflicts that we see taking place in the United States, but also over in the continent of Asia, as China and India, two very populous, very large countries, are kind of at odds with each other regarding their borders. And we're going to also look at Jordan actually warning Israel of their annexation in parts of the area of the West Bank there. And we're going to turn over to our field correspondent, Larry McGee, for more on this. Larry, what do you have for us?
Though it is becoming increasingly more difficult to do so, it is still nonetheless possible at this point to live desensitized and complacent and to minimize and disregard the current explosion of global calamities and the implosion of all of the various support structures on which most people have been trained to rely. This sort of obliviousness and self-deception has been made possible in large part by the expertly crafted and hypnotizing laws of entertainment. But as many are now being violently and suddenly shaken awoke through the shock of the world's current state of chaos and scarcity, one fact is making itself apparent first and before others. There is no item more scarce in the world today than hope, with the exception of peace. There is war at every scale, small and large, micro and macro. There is no peace in the world. Hundreds of Chinese soldiers advanced into the disputed area of Ladakh, India this week as evidence of that. The incursion is reported to have come complete with temporary dwellings and heavy machinery. The situation is being described as a standoff, and a nuclear one at that, since both nations have declared nuclear weapons. At the moment, however, there are also reports that both countries have begun dialogue with the intent to reduce any further escalation, but the conflict is being framed as one of the worst the two have had in decades. Like the bond between two atoms of hydrogen and oxygen weakening and disassociating is like the bond between America and the EU, which is reportedly now doing the same. There are explosive implications for the breakup or breakdown of the alliance between the US and Europe's strongest powers. But due to what is being perceived as overbearing and domineering either us or them sort of expectations on behalf of the US, some European leaders are indeed suggesting that Europe reconsider its relationship with America and begin thinking in terms of its own best interests, particularly with regard to trade with nations like China, with whom America is currently locked in a Cold War. The wars in the Middle East have not ceased at all, and there is a threat now of a breakdown in Jordanian-Israeli relations due to Israel's intention to annex certain areas of the controversial West Bank. The nation of Jordan has close ties to the disputed territory due to its large Palestinian population, which is urging the Jordanian government to take a strong stance against Israel and confront them concerning its latest ambition. There are open religious disputes also beginning to surface between the two nations concerning the Temple Mount, and the net result of it all can be taken from the Prime Minister of Jordan's recent remark that relations between the two nations has reached its lowest point in years. For YPN News, I'm Larry McGee. Katan Jeff, back to you.
Well, Jordan not too pleased with that annexation there that Israel is planning, but remember, Jordan also has the custodianship of the Temple Mount, so
right.
They have other interests in the area as well. It'll be interesting to see if the two sides can work this out. Yeah. Well, two countries who the United States has called enemies are teaming up to help each other out, despite threats from the U.S. Iran is sending oil tankers from the Gulf of Oman to the Arabian Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and then into the Red Sea and across the Mediterranean, finally crossing the North Atlantic Ocean all the way to Venezuela to deliver refined fuel and other essential chemicals to the country.
Well, there are 5 oil tankers in all, making the incredible journey that covers over 10,000 nautical miles, taking well over a month to arrive at the Venezuelan port on the eastern coast of South America. As the oil tankers get closer to the country, Venezuela's Executive Economic Zone, or EEZ, President Maduro sent a Navy ship from the Bolivarian Armed Forces to escort the tankers the rest of the way, as promised.
Well, despite threats from the U.S. to stop the tankers from reaching South America, 2 of the oil tankers, the Fortune and the Forest, have made landfall with their cargo intact. Now, many thankful to Iran and the Maduro government for making this bold move, since the country of Venezuela has been experiencing a severe fuel shortage during the U.S. imposed sanctions. And both those countries have something in common, because they both have those sanctions put upon them, which is seriously hurting their economy. So now they're starting to work together and say, hey, maybe we can overcome this.
Yeah, and it's a ripple effect with the fuel, because that is a major export for the country, which provides other resources. So as we reported in times past, the people in Venezuela are also suffering with food shortages as well, and they don't even have proper medical care because of these sanctions that have been placed upon them by the United States of America. Well, the 3 remaining ships, named the Petunia, Faxon, and Clavel, are still on their way across the North Atlantic and are expected to make it into port along with the Venezuelan coast in a few days, provided, of course, there is no interference from the United States.
Well, one might wonder, why are these two countries going to such great lengths and risks to get refined fuel and chemicals to Venezuela when the South American country has more oil than most other countries in the world? Well, the answer is simple. While Venezuela has an abundance of oil, it no longer has the resources to refine it. So without being able to refine it, it's not beneficial to them. They have to be able to refine it to be able to use it.
That's right. RT's Rick Sanchez interviewed Venezuela's ambassador to the UN, Samuel Moncada, who explained the reason for partnering with Iran, saying, "The Trump administration has threatened and coerced and scared away almost every single international corporation from Venezuela. So they are scared to sell us any kind of equipment, any kind of spare parts to work in our oil industry. So we are not just buying fuel," he said, "we are buying chemical components to start up again our refinery, so we will be able to refine our own fuel from now on."
Also, having the oil is great, but without a way to refine their oil, it is unusable to the Venezuelan people. While the U.S., through its sanctions, has played a large role in the collapse of the country's oil refining capability, those who oppose the Maduro government say the state oil company was mismanaged and they underinvested in refining oil, which has led to the current local fuel shortage.
But regardless of how it got to this point, there is clearly a fuel shortage in Venezuela. And Iran, like the rest of the world's oil producers, have more than they need, and they're in need of money to fuel its economy. So this is why the two countries have joined together against the power of the United States, so they can attempt to survive amid threats that the U.S. will not tolerate their partnership.
Well, finally in the news, the U.S. ambassador to Poland creating quite a stir with this bizarre tweet. It reads, "If Germany wants to diminish nuclear capability and weaken NATO, perhaps Poland, which pays its fair share, understands the risks, and is on NATO's eastern flank, could house the capabilities here."
Well, that comment was tweeted by Georgette Mosbacher, who was nominated by President Trump and appointed the U.S. ambassador to Poland back in 2018. She is receiving a lot of backlash for her comment, which seems to throw aside all reasoning and sane judgment to suggest Poland take on the storing of these weapons of mass destruction, as the U.S. likes to call them.
Well, numerous experts have been evaluating Mosbacher's tweet. Experts like those at the Brookings Institute, which have said this is a truly bad idea for many reasons. Now, Scott Ritter, a UN weapons inspector, agrees, saying if Poland agreed to this, it would certainly provoke Russia. Now, Ritter was also a U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer at one point in his career and has written an article on this topic for RT.com.
In a recent interview, Mr. Ritter told RT it wasn't just a bad idea, but he said, "It's a horrible idea. First of all, it serves zero deterrent value. The whole purpose of having nuclear weapons in Europe is part of the NATO nuclear capability for its deterrence value. Anybody who actually thinks these weapons are going to be used or have a utility in combat," he said, "is suicidal and should get their mind checked."
And that's not really the only time that we've heard somebody in a higher office, such as Mr. Ritter there, a weapons inspector, and also a intelligence officer, a former intelligence officer, saying that the use of these nuclear weapons is basically insane. It's not going to come out on anyone's benefit. And some have even referred to it as like a mass suicide, because once one country launches a nuclear weapon, the other country launches, it's basically almost guaranteed mutual destruction.
Yes, it's mad, that mutually assured destruction that they actually talked about back in '76 when they came together for that TAPS report to show how great the devastation would be if it was just 1/3 of the nuclear arsenal between, at that time, Soviet Union and the United States were released. We're talking almost complete devastation to the northern hemisphere, and eventually to the southern hemisphere as well.
Right, and that's been 45 years, and since then the technology has still increased. Countries have still developed their nuclear weapons, making them much more powerful than they were back then. So we haven't improved at all. Only the situation has become a lot worse, and certainly a lot closer, as that the nuclear time clock there, closer to midnight, people see this nuclear war is coming.
That's right.
But if you would like to know what you could do to protect yourself and your family, contact the House of Yahweh. When you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the Prophetic Word magazine and monthly newsletter. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh, P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. You can visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, and Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can visit our website by going to YPNnews.com. You can email the House of Yahweh at info@yahweh.com. And for all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And as before, don't forget the very beneficial and essential programs that are free, available online 24 hours, 7 days a week. The Yisrael Says and Ask Yisrael programs. You can find those by going to YisraelSays.com and AskYisrael.com.
Well, in a very uncertain time, one thing is for certain: a solid, concrete, and guaranteed to help you message from Yisrael Hawkins. Don't go anywhere. Up next, Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
And I'm Katan Alexander.
Thanks for watching.